Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm BuffaloPrime, and we're kind of gonna bring doing some of the news to stuff. That was a terrible way to open a video. So for those of you that may not know, I'm actually an HR professional in my free time. And by free time, I mean like what I do is a day job that keeps the lights on. I've been doing HR for about 8 years now as a business partner, so I kind of hybrid between operations and HR. I have a pretty decent knowledge base on HR law and practices and things like that. And I just recently discovered that there's a subreddit called the r/AskHR subreddit where people go in and they ask HR questions that are sometimes really funny and sometimes really serious. And I could probably talk about HR indefinitely. I love this career field. Okay, maybe love is not the right word. I'm good at it, I feel. So I thought what would be a kind of a cool segment that we do is I'll just read and give my thoughts on it. And maybe it'll be funny and maybe it'll be complete shit and we'll find out together. Here we go. All right, first question comes from u/CMCGuire96. C. McGuire, maybe, talking about in New York, recently released What Do I Do? And you can read that on the screen right now. But basically, their employer is coming to them with a letter because of tardiness saying like, hey, today's going to be your last day, but you can elect to resign instead of being fired. What would you rather do? And he's basically asking what he should do. First comment basically says to resign here. So there's a couple of different ways that you can approach this kind of scenario. First of all, I'd be very interested to know what that termination letter says. So he said he was handed a termination letter. I would read that and consult an attorney. There's a couple of reasons for that. A, if you're actually being fired for your attendance, HR is not going to be like, you could resign. They're most likely going to be like, you're fired. So there's got to be a gray area somewhere where the HR department of your company is looking for the less risky option, which is allowing you to resign instead of them firing you. Now, if they transfer you to a different location, if they basically made it so they're pushing you out the door and there was no way for you to have timely attendance, an attorney would love to see that because they could potentially go to the employer and be like, wrongful termination, here's a lawsuit, right? But if you resign, you basically will forfeit a lot of that, especially if they have a severance agreement tied to their agreement to release you, essentially. So I would consult an attorney just because like there's a lot of unknowns with this question, so not 100% sure. All right, next question comes from Pennsylvania. I was terminated from 2 jobs in the past, but they were just side jobs and I don't really even care about them that much. Can I tell that to an interviewer? So reading over the past decades, I've had many part-time jobs along with my primary job of owning a small business. Most of these jobs were minimum wage, didn't really care much about. Terminated in 2 of them and now I'm done with school. Passed my actuarial exam and I'm getting interviews. So to be completely honest, the effort I put into my $70K actuary job is about 10 times more worth than putting into minimum wage side jobs. But this is fact to bring up, is that okay to bring up in an interview? Do I put too much emphasis on money? It is indeed the truth, but I'm just wondering how it would sound. First of all, if you ever go to an interview and you're like, yeah, I don't give a shit about low paying jobs because I've been trying to get this high paying jobs, I wouldn't hire you. What a weird mindset to have. So here's what you do. You don't say anything about those other jobs. In fact, if they were just part-time minimum wage jobs that have nothing to do with your career path, I wouldn't even put them on your resume. Because imagine what your resume is going to look like if you put every single job you've ever worked on it. It's all irrelevant. A lot of recruiters don't care that you worked at, the McDonald's part-time. It just doesn't really matter unless you're early in your career. Now, let's assume this person is early in their career, even though they said over the past decade, I've had many part-time jobs. If you're early in your career and you put a part-time job on your resume, that's fine. You don't have to disclose why you aren't working there at all. And in fact, you can kind of fudge why you got let go or released or whatever. And unless they do a consented background check on your former employee, which you have to sign off on, there's no disclosure there, right? So the only things that employer is legally able to tell another employer is that your start date, your end date, and your title, and that's it. No reason for termination. If they give that, it's unlawful practice. So I would not put part-time jobs on your resume. I wouldn't even talk about them. There's like no reason to. If you've been working over a decade to an actuarial job, well, you don't have to mention that you mowed lawns on the side. Like that, no employer is really going to care about that. So I just wouldn't mention it at all. Like, don't even talk about it. So that'd be my answer to that. This next question comes from Golden Mama Life from Pennsylvania, talking about declining a job offer a couple years ago, but wanting to reapply, and what are some good ways to approach reapplying for that job. This is actually pretty interesting, and I'm not gonna, you can read it if you want. I'm just gonna talk about the general idea. So a lot of employers, especially if they offered a job to you, depending on how you declined it, would probably love to talk to you again, unless the position's already full, right? So if we offered you a position and you made a really good standout, especially if you've continued to contact them throughout the years, that should be a pretty easy door to open. But I'm going to go ahead and assume that, like most people, you don't talk to your previous job offers very often, right? You just don't do that, right? So what I would do is reach out to the same contact that made you the initial offer through the same email that you got the initial offer on. That way they could see, oh, a couple years ago I offered this person a position. And you could say like, hey, just to let you know, circumstances have changed. I would love to be considered for an opportunity at your company again. I would say it like that too, not the exact job, because if that job's not there, you're kind of SOL. But stating like I would love to come and talk about opportunities at your company really shows that you're committed to working for the company, not necessarily caring what kind of role it is, right? And that also opens the door for the recruiter to be like, oh yeah, I remember this person, let me pass your name along. If the recruiter has moved on, typically there'll be an automated message that will kick back to either say like contact this person instead, or you'll get an undeliverable message. If that's the case, take a look for like a general contact information, or you could do what a lot of people on TikTok recommend, is go to LinkedIn, try to figure out who the new recruiter is, reach out to them on LinkedIn, say the same message. But yeah, there's no harm in approaching a previous company that you declined an offer for, saying like, hey, circumstances have changed and I would love to be considered again. All right, this next question, I believe it comes from Australia, AU, I don't know what that is, but what is the point purpose of performance reviews and objective setting? Is it to have key metrics to decide who leaves and who stays when a layoff comes? And does it influence salary reviews? From user Raporto? It's a good question. I actually this is like heavily debated within HR, the purpose of performance reviews and especially how to go about doing them. Most companies do an annual performance review, which I think is kind of garbage because recency bias is a real thing and it's very difficult to train people away from it. So, I mean, the purpose of performance reviews kind of goes a bunch of different ways. And I'm going to talk about the dark side of HR, which is like a title of a book I would love to write, as well as like the front-facing reason, right? Let's start with the front-facing reason. Performance reviews give an opportunity for you to discuss your performance with your leader in a very dedicated space that says like, hey, here's how I think I'm doing. Here's how you think you're doing. Where does this mash up? How do we move forward? It creates dialogue, which normally might not happen, especially if you have a leader that's more operational based rather than developing you. So it's a good opportunity to like create that dialogue that wouldn't normally be there. And you know, frankly, yeah, it could tie into performance reviews, right? And tie into merit-based increases, especially in companies that have very front-facing merit programs. You can very much see and know what to expect. Also, it's very important when it comes to union contracts as well. So some union contracts will include a pay-for-performance merit-based increase, although a lot of them don't. A lot of them care about seniority. That's a whole other wormhole about union contracts. So now here on the dark side of HR, let me explain why performance reviews are important. It is a fail-safe for the company to terminate you if they need to, right? So let's say you have a performance review and it does not go well, and then 2 months later you're fired, and you try to claim to unemployment or to a judge, I was discriminately terminated. The company can go, well, on your performance review, we indicated all of these issues that you were having, and they were ongoing issues. That is another document that the company can display to an attorney and to a judge that says, see, you should have known. So that's kind of the dark side of that. When it comes to layoffs, most likely layoffs will come from a seniority based, although in at-will employment, sometimes the performance review will be a part of that as well. Be careful about layoffs, for sure. If you are subject to a layoff, again, you may want to consult an attorney, especially if you believe that the layoffs had nothing to do with merit, nothing to do with seniority, and there was some bias in it. All right, in North Carolina, a coworker had a graphic conversation about a book with another coworker in front of me from Throwaway 277360. It says here, two coworkers had a pretty graphic discussion about a sexual book, 50 Shades of Grey, at work during shift change. All took place in front of me and made me extremely uncomfortable. Things such as, you'll need a towel to sit on when you read it. Were said, oh my God. Were said, I work at a state health facility. The coworker who initiated the conversation dragged the second coworker into the topic, and it was a one-sided conversation. I have some hesitancy about going to HR because it's the first time bringing an issue to them, and I'm not sure if I should discuss it with our manager. This is the first time a coworker has overshared. Just wondering what to expect to happen or what might be a possible outcome. So funny enough, the way that the law reads when it comes to sexual harassment, right? And that might seem like a giant leap, like, oh, here comes HR talking about harassment. But like literally, let me tell you, sexual harassment and Title VII basically says that, and it's a federal mandate, that companies have to provide you with an environment that is free of harassment, of discomfort, of bias, things like that, on the basis of a lot of protected stuff, right? Basically, that's the general idea of Title VII and a bunch of other federal law protections, right? That includes conversations of a sexual nature that don't involve you, but are public enough where you're like, ooh, this is disgusting, right? So imagine, if you will, and this is why the law is written, if you walk into work every day and you aren't engaged with, but you watch two coworkers talking about how much they want to fuck each other every day. Like, that's ridiculous, and there's no place for it in the workplace, and the federal law agrees. So what I would recommend in this scenario depends on your comfort level with your manager. If you want to go to your manager, I would recommend doing that first. However, going to HR is perfectly viable as well. This isn't a situation where if you go to HR, they'll be like, well, did you talk to your manager? They'll probably jump in pretty quickly and be like, all right, well, we're going to look into this and we'll let you know how it goes. There's a couple of things here. Whistleblowing, there's a lot of variations of that, but basically if you come forward to HR with a concern that's legitimate and you get retaliated against, that's really bad, and you can sue for that. But basically, HR is there to help prevent that from happening. So I wouldn't worry about going to HR with this concern and like you're worrying about how that's going to impact your employment, because it definitely should not. But going to HR, what they're going to end up doing is they're going to probably talk to, at least they're going to ask you if anybody else overheard this conversation. They're going to talk to the person that was getting talked to, that one-sided conversation, the person receiving, to figure out what happened, and then they're going to approach the person making that conversation. If it's a first-time offense, likely what they'll do is they'll document this. All of this is going to be documented, so that way if you go to court and say they were talking about sex stuff and the company did nothing even though I said something about it, they could be like, well, no, we did. We just didn't disclose to you what we did. Anyway, so what the HR is going to do, it's depending on the background of the person that is doing the discussing of an inappropriate nature. This isn't egregious enough to be like sexual harassment, get the fuck out, right? But it is enough to say like, hey, you cannot have these kind of conversations while you're at work. You have to be careful about who can hear you and what you're talking about. This is a professional environment. You're expected to be that. If you do this again, we may do X, right? And they'll document all of this. So that way they have it. And then they'll come back to you and be like, hey, the issue is resolved. And that's probably all they'll say. So I would bring it up, because that's kind of disgusting. All right, let's do one more. This one's from Affectionate Owl 6288 in Florida. Says, what happens when I hand in my 2 weeks notice and I'm immediately terminated? I have a new job lined up starting June 1st. I'm going to be decent and give a 2 weeks notice, but I don't want to forgo 2 weeks pay for no reason. If I may write a resignation effective the 31st or the 30th and I'm terminated immediately, would I be able to expect severance pay since I was let go before my resignation became effective? Is there any way around this other than to just not give notice, which I've considered doing but decided against because I don't want to burn any bridges? Interesting conversation here. Florida is a right-to-work state. So right-to-work means that you can be terminated for any reason or no reason, but you can also do the same on the other end, right? So you have a new job lined up. So this is a really important moment where you should look at the history of your company, right? And your own performance. So if you've watched other coworkers leave and they've been terminated or just suddenly stopped appearing, even though they said like, oh, I got a new job lined up, and then they suddenly stopped coming, you could probably anticipate that your company might terminate you. Or if your relationship with your manager is poor and your performance reviews or any kind of things, you have a negative track, it's possible that your manager would go, yeah, thanks for your 2 week notice. Now I know you're gonna be useless for 2 weeks. Get the hell out of my office. And you're fired today, right? Bad managers do that, but it happens. I will tell you that companies traditionally don't wanna do that. Traditionally, right? And this is a lot of what ifs, so we're gonna play in this what if space. Companies do not want to fire you if you are going to quit on your own, because it's way riskier to terminate someone versus them voluntarily leaving, right? So that way you can't turn around and be like, I gave my notice, but because X, Y, and Z, you fired me, and that's unlawful, right? Instead, they could be like, well, you were kind of a poor performer, you gave notice, we let you walk. And then a judge is going to be like, well, it's kind of like it's your decision to leave at that point, right? So a company will more than likely want you to leave. Now, the last part is interesting to me, because I don't care as an HR person if you give notice or not. I don't care. There's a courtesy part of it, and you don't want to burn bridges, and that is completely valid, because some managers and some companies will mark you immediately as unhireable. You will never be able to return to the company again. Even if they turn over everyone, if their HR system flags you as unhireable and nobody's there to vouch for it, like, you're just unhireable. Sorry, like, you're never going to be able to come back. And if you leave without notice, that will traditionally happen. But if you have no intention of going back to that company, who cares? And I say that frankly, who cares? If you're going to quit, quit. Like, if you really want to guarantee that you are going to be paid through your entire 2 weeks until you start your new job, and you don't want any time off, or there's no PTO payout or whatever, then just work until the very end and then quit the same day. And that's, again, weird from an HR perspective. I would love it if 2-week notices were valid and everybody gave them. But like, do what's best for you, especially if you never anticipate returning to that company again. So I hope you had fun watching this. Hopefully it was informative. It wasn't too funny. I was hoping for more funny questions, but like, HR is not that funny usually. So, but yeah, leave a comment in the comment section below, especially if you have HR related questions. Maybe I'll do a series where I like respond to comments or whatever. But for now, I'm Buffalo Prime. Hopefully this was fun.